So this is a book that I think I could talk about for like 10 years. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw really bad. It is summer now, that is why I'm wearing a tanka tapa. I'm re-recording this video because the first video, the audio stopped working. Sometimes you just have to redo things, you know? Sometimes in life you just have to do things over again, like paying your bills or doing your taxes. Okay, on to the review. I am doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the top 100 books of the modern library's top 100 books of the 20th century. You can find more information about the link that I'll post in the description below. I'm really trying to pick up steam. I'm sort of like a rundown Thomas the Tank Steam Engine. It's just not working out for me. Book we are talking about today is huge. It's about 576 pages in paperback, and today we are talking about William Stryon's Sophie's Choice. I think this book is incredibly complex, incredibly dense. There's so much history and there's so much culture and there's so much nuance in everything in this book that I think today will be a lovely discussion. Also, an incredibly well-known film featuring Meryl Streep, one of my favorite actresses. Meryl Streep is also featured in Mamma Mia, which is also one of my favorite movies, but not the second one, because not even Cher could save that. So Sophie's Choice is probably a term that you've heard bantered around on the internet or in discussions with people when they're talking about very difficult things. A Sophie's Choice situation is a situation where you are given a decision between two very difficult things, and you must pick one of those things, or there will be a third, even worse option that could happen. So it's sort of between a rock and a hard place is another way of saying it was a Sophie's Choice kind of situation. I really want to underline before we even start talking about this book that this book was laugh out loud funny in places and witty and retrospective and has a lot of heart. So I just want to say this book is not all about trauma or drama. There is a lot of really interesting thoughts that the authors put into this book, and I think you will enjoy it. Now, first a TLDR, or go watch the movie. This is an adult book. I have to bring this up because when I read it, I thought this was going to be a book about moral subjects, but not about sexy subjects. There are a lot of situations where we get into the main character's head. And this main character is a virgin who's extremely sex deprived in his early 20s, and boy does it show. He very much gives off Howard Wolowitz vibes from The Big Bang Theory, if you've ever watched that. This book is also very Freudian because this book is not actually so much about World War II as it is about young people having sexy thoughts and being dweeby virgins. This book is set in Brooklyn, New York City, shortly after World War II, and we follow the adventures of an up-and-coming young writer who goes by the name Stingo, who comes from the south of the United States to come and try and make his way in the big city as he tries to write what he considers to be the next great American novel, which of course is going to be about his experiences growing up in the South. After a short stint of working at a publishing agency, he uses his life savings to make a bet and a wager on himself that he's going to be able to write a great book that's worth publishing. And as part of him trying to save money so that his money can last longer while he's writing this book, he moves into a boarding house. And this is where he meets the other two main characters of the book, Sophie and Nathan. So then what we have is these three young people becoming close friends and great companions and love each other and sort of live the best life they can as young people in New York City. However, because of several tragic circumstances, things don't go quite as planned, and I will tell you that I think this author is the king of a plot twist, which is very important to the themes of this book, as themes of racism, classism, all the isms come up as part of the discussions between Nathan, Sophie, and Stingo. The next main character is Sophie Załastowska. She is a beautiful Christian Polish woman in her early 30s who has survived World War II and the concentration camps, and she has come to New York to start a new life. Not a lot is known about her at the start of the book by Stingo, whose perspective we read the book through, but he eventually falls in love with her and falls in love with her lust for life and the way that she perceives things. And he finds her to be sort of a new family member for him in this big, wild new city that he's decided to live in. Her history and her family is fraught with lots of secrecy from her friends because her family was involved in very specific ways with Polish revolutionaries who were sort of the beginning, the prototype for what ended up being the Nazis in Poland and Germany, which you will find out later in the book. She is trying her best to recover from her experience of living in a concentration camp by being totally in love with her off-again, on-again boyfriend, Nathan. Nathan Landau is Sophie's absolute one true love, and it's his one true love as well. However, they go through multiple spats and they have knockdown fights, which is part of the mystery of this book, which is why do Sophie and Nathan fight all the time if they seem like they're absolutely head over heels in love with each other? And part of the mystery is why Nathan lives in a boarding house when he works for a pharmaceutical company making lots of money, and he comes from a very wealthy family, so it doesn't really make sense why he's living in sort of a poor student house when he could be living on his own like a responsible adult. One of the things that really struck me in this book is that Nathan is incredibly charming and charismatic with everyone he meets. He's very well read, he can talk his way out of a paper bag, and he seems like a stand-up good guy. However, one of the first experiences Stingo has with Nathan is watching him cuss out Sophie in one of the most terrible scenes I think I've read in a book in a long time. But this doesn't mean that Nathan was particularly the worst or the most evil character I've ever met in a book. There's a real mystery around why Nathan is so angry about things that seemingly aren't a big deal. And this is part of the mystery that you will find out later in the book about what's going on with Nathan. Now, let's talk about the themes of this book, because this book is a thematic book. It definitely goes over certain points again and again to try and talk to the reader about what really matters to young people in New York City during this time. This book explores themes of guilt, trauma, and love set against the backdrop of just after World War II, when young people are really trying to discover who they are and who they should be after such a terrible, terrible event. There's a lot of trauma in this book, but it's an extremely well-written book, and it talks through the various issues while still making it seem like there's hope for young people as they continue to grow and learn about what they should do, even though it covers very difficult subjects like racism and the Holocaust. Now, guilt is central to this book, and it's central because in Sophie's character, she feels very guilty about a lot of the things that happened during the Holocaust, many of those things which she couldn't control. And she has something which I think we would all now call survivor's guilt. She feels guilty because she survived and so many of her friends and so many of her family did not. She is perhaps the sole survivor of her family, living abroad trying to make the best of her life, even though so many people fought and died in the war for what they believed is their ideals, while the only one who survived was Sophie, who is just trying to stay alive. And also, not just Sophie, but Stingo feels guilty about the racism and the racist background of his family from owning slaves. And this is something that he and Sophie start to bond over, about the fact that there are things and secrets in their past which they're not proud of, but they're part of because of who they're associated with, even though it's not maybe their values. And I think just if I can give a picture of guilt and religion, because that is something else that plays into Sophie's character, I'm going to read you this quote about when Sophie decided she was going to give up religion because the horror of the Holocaust was too much for her to bear. And I said to her, yes, I once believed in Christ and his Holy Mother too, but I said that I knew that Christ had turned his face away from me and I could no longer pray to him as I did once in Krakow. And when she asked how I know that Christ have turned his face away from me, I said I just knew. I just knew that only a God, only a Jesus who had no pity and no longer cared for me could permit the people I loved to be killed and let me live with such guilt. It was terrible enough that they died like they'd done, but this guilt was more than I could bear. And so trauma is such an important part of understanding what was going on with Sophie and understanding that a lot of what she was going through was just a traumatic past that could not be resolved because it was too much. So there's a lot of trauma that Sophie goes through overall, and she experiences that both in her relationship with Nathan, with its imperfections, and she experiences it with her choices that she felt she has to live with throughout the war. Now, sacrifice is the last major theme of the book, and I think it's really important because each of the three main characters sacrifices something to be with one another. For example, Stingo continues to live in this boarding house even though he feels like he's in the middle of Sophie and Nathan's relationship because they're his closest friends.
Yes!
And Sophie many times goes back to Nathan and tries to repair their relationship, even though Nathan is not only not a perfect person, but is struggling with something, a deep and dark secret himself. And there are some sacrifices he makes later in the book that will be quite shocking if you decide to read this book. I feel like this book could have been called Stingo's Choice or Nathan's Choice, and it would have had a similar effect because this book is absolutely about what you would sacrifice to do things for the people you love and for the things you love in life. You could probably find 10 or more plots or themes to discuss in this book, but I just think you should read this book and see what really impacts you. And it's a very philosophical book, even though it feels very current, and it's a book that was written a really long time ago. Okay, now on to the review. This book rocks. I feel this book is maybe one of the best books I've read this year and maybe in the past few years. And I think it's actually a real critical shame that it's so low on the Modern Library's list. And I think there are other books that are coming up that I don't understand why they're higher. There is a bit of a bias towards books that were made in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure. We'll keep reading to find out. But I think this is a book that every adult should read in their 30s, especially adults who live in North America, because this is a slice of life book about what it's like to live after World War II. And as someone who's read more than enough slice of life books after World War II or during World War II or during World War I, partially as part of this reading challenge, I can tell you most of them are not very interesting, but this one feels modern and fresh and current because a lot of the subjects that the characters are struggling with in this book is a subject that we struggle with today, whether it's racism, classism, being treated differently because of things you've gone through. These are all very relevant subjects, and the subject of war and peace and how to live in times of war and peace, the things you might have to do if you're involved in a war or you're a civilian who is part of the terrible things that happen in war, you might have to make choices that are really difficult. And this kind of book brings to mind the fact that people might have to do terrible things, and the best thing we can have for them is compassion. You should always look at people's actions and what they say when they're talking about drastic changes or hinting at drastic changes and what that might mean for people who are vulnerable or struggling. Because in reality, what happens in Sophie's Choice and what happened in history leading up to World War II is a bunch of people were saying, oh, we don't want to get rid of these people. Oh, we don't want to hurt anybody. Think about what are other people really trying to say. And so it's good to think about different circumstances where we can apply this in our own life about how to be socially just and to try and think about things the right way. The good news about this book is that even though this book is about terrible and tragic consequences and bad things that happen to Sophie throughout this book, and I think that's sort of the main plot thread going throughout this entire book, she tries to protect the people she loves and cares about. She tries to forgive them for bad things that have happened to them and that are still happening to them, and she tries to make choices that she thinks will lead her to a better life. So this book is tempered between historical fiction about a slice of life war story, as well as summer flings in the summer with young people. So it's got a little bit of something for everyone, and I highly recommend this book. Okay, well, that's all for me this week. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. As always, you can hit that bell to get notifications for when I get a new video out. It is summer, so I hope you're enjoying summer activities and summer reading. Next time we'll be taking a dive into a very different kind of urban book called Under the Net by Iris Murdoch. As always, stay curious, stay reading.